Alright everyone, welcome back to another Star Wars Galaxy of Heroes video with Fat Phil, and in this video we're going to be talking about the core gear crunch. And this is a topic I've seen a couple players ask me about, how do I have so much core gear, what have I done over the years, and so I'll kind of give you guys the roadmap for what I've done, some tips and tricks, and then also kind of just explain how you need to go about getting this stuff and acquiring it, because there are a couple of pitfalls and a couple of traps that I think players fall into, and then they get behind on core gear, and that is the worst place to be in this game. So let's go ahead and thank my channel members before we dive into our video. You guys are amazing. Thank you so much for your continued support. If you guys want to join channel memberships, link in the description down below. Otherwise, smash that subscribe button. That is free, and it helps this channel grow so much. You guys are amazing. Thank you all again. Let's get into our video. Alright, so core gear. Core gear is the first crunch you'll probably come across in the game, right? Again, I have a couple of your early teams, right? Like the Phoenix, Imperial Troopers, and like the Commander Luke Skywalker Rex. Again, I'm just, there's other teams here that we can throw on. I'm just throwing a couple out here that are early teams. So you'll encounter the core gear where you're like, man, I don't have enough Carbanis or Mark III this or stun cuffs or whatever, right? Because all of these characters need it. And just for perspective here, in the Phoenix Squadron, Gear 8 to Gear 9, my Kanan, so he needs this piece, right, which is annoying. He also needs a stun gun here, a stun gun here, and a whole nother Carbanti. Well, Zeb also needs the exact same things. So that is 300 total Carbanis, 200 total stun guns, 40 of these pieces, right? Like you get the picture. There's a lot of stuff you need just for those two characters, right? And that's Phoenix Squadron, like one that I'm not even investing that much in. So, that's them, let alone your Imperial Troopers, the Commander Luke team, right? There's a lot to invest in these characters. And so this crunch was really helped out by the double drop of gear, the changes to Galactic Challenges, right? There was a lot of stuff they've done to kind of make the core gear farm a little bit easier. But there are some players who are still finding themselves behind. And there's a couple of reasons that they fall behind here. Number one, I have them up here, obviously. You invest too much in your core teams, right? These early teams, right? If you invest too much, especially in ones that you're not going to be using at that time. Great examples here, like Farm Boy Luke, Stormtrooper Han, right? Who aren't even needed. But then, I'd even argue that, like, unless you're going to use Leia and R2-D2, you don't really want to be investing crazy amounts of gear in them early on, because you won't really have a use for them, right? That you want to get through with the minimal gear possible on your ancillary teams and focus your gear on the primary stuff, right? And that will keep you ahead of that core gear, because if you fall behind on core gear, it's going to keep you from getting the other things, which I will cover in other videos. All right, so when does this crunch kind of start alleviating itself? And I have Executor, right? Your first major farm with Relics and Kyrotech, right? This is kind of when your core gear, you'll start to notice that it's stockpiling a little bit. Because what will happen is that you're past the point of needing crazy amounts of that core gear, right? Not that you might not need it, to get to Gear 13 and stuff like that, but it's a lot less, right? And so you'll start stockpiling it because you're working on the signal data, you're working on relics, you're working on, other things. And so that core gear starts adding up a little bit, right? And that will kind of accumulate in your roster. You'll kind of go through these swings where you're going to have a lot, you might have a little, you might have a lot, but there'll kind of be this stockpile that starts growing that you'll notice over time increases, especially as you work on more and more of those relic-intensive farms or Kyrotech-intensive farms. I mean, some characters, look, they just suck to gear, but I think in a lot of these cases, you'll kind of see yourself, moving in that direction. And I have my Iden Versio team down here as a great example, where in this case here, right, my Iden and Colonel Stark, they no longer will need core gear, right? They just need relics. My Death Trooper and Shore Trooper, right, they need that Gear 12, Gear 13 gear, which some of those still do require, especially on the right side, right? Like, they'll still require some of this core gear over here, which, sucks. But you think, 50 Carbanis and 50 of those comparative to what he probably needed from, before this, that's nothing, right? Same thing with Shore Trooper over here, right? We got some stun cuffs. We got some Carbanis again, nothing compared to what he needed earlier than this, right? And then finally, like my Snow Trooper, where he needs a stun gun, and I think this piece, so just like a stun gun, right? Now to get up to Gear 12, like again, a lot less required here than what I would have needed for all the other previous levels, because before, especially for characters who didn't need Kyrotex, their way of ensuring that you couldn't gear them up right away: stun cuffs, stun guns, Carbonis, right? Those were the crunches for the longest time before relics were a thing. So again, as I was kind of saying, you kind of build this stockpile as you get into this gear 12, gear 13, because your focus has to shift, right? You're going from, okay, I needed Carbonis to now I need these, where is it at? Hold on. These stupid Armatech fusion furnaces that you need like 17 bajillion of to get characters to relics. It's insane to me. So yeah, that's kind of when you stockpile those, right? That's kind of when it starts solving itself, is as you're building those later level gear characters and really focusing on taking them further, the core gear starts to kind of, solve itself, right? Now there's a couple other things you can do with the core gear. Number one, low gear for the win. Especially for a lot of those early Jurley guides. I have a whole video where I talk about like not over investing, but this is one of the best examples, is like my Ewoks and the characters I used for Malak. And the rest of my Malak farm, I'll be completely honest, I had at lower gear when I unlocked him, but they've since gone up, and I didn't want to show that like I have a Relic 7 Bastila Shan. Like that was not the gear level that she was at when I did that event. But anyway, right? So try and do these events with low gear. And here's why, right? And then people are going to say, oh, well, Wicked is a requirement for GL Space Buns, right? GL Leia needs him, so you could take him up a lot higher. I mean, yeah, sure, I could, but that gear that you're going to invest in that Wicket, let's say that I took Wicket up to, I don't know, gear 12, right? That I spend all this gear to get him there, right? Spend all these things, right? And I get him to gear 12. I mean, for what purpose, right? Like, what purpose is that going to actually serve in my account? Yes, eventually I need him for Leia, but if I keep him at this level and I have these pieces that I can use for other characters who I'm actually going to take to relic levels, that's far better use, and just, suck up the RNG a little bit, right? Because unless you're planning to take your Ewoks all the way to gear 12 together or wherever, right? That, like, you kind of want to think of it that just a single character to, an obscenely high relic level, especially, or like a, gear level in a team like this, is not really going to help you all that much. Because it's not going to change what I can do to that team in a GAC territory war most of the time, right? So that's kind of why you kind of try to stick with this low gear, right? Same thing with, my characters here. For the Malak event, I was just trying to do it with the bare minimum, right? So I saved, look at my Zalbar. I mean, he's like barely above the threshold, right? And you see, I saved on, some of these pieces that, take core gear, right? That take up gear that I can use on other characters. And that allows me to not have to worry about farming it because I didn't spend all that stuff. Because remember, once you throw gear on a character, you cannot take it off, right? It is written in stone, right? It is there for forever. So try and do the, low gear stuff here when you can. And then let's say that you're failing, right? So like it's gone now, but we had that Tusken GC, and I was just failing at this like time and time again. And what I did was I spent I think I spent like 100 Carbonis total on my Tusken Chieftain and Tusken Warrior to get them up to gear 9. And I'm going to be clear, there was no Kyrotech invested, right? Gear 8 to gear 9, they didn't need Kyrotechs. So I felt pretty good about being able to do that. And, but because I haven't spent some of those Carbonis like on my Ewoks and the characters I needed for Malak, right? Because I saved those over the years, I was able to spend 100 Carbonis on these guys and not think about it, right? It was a non-consequence to me. But had I invested those in the Zalbars and the Phoenix Squadrons, right? Through all these years, if you spend all that stuff, it eventually will come back to bite you in some way, shape, or form. And this was a great example where what I would recommend is if you're failing at something, right? Adjust like a character slightly, or adjust 2 characters, or do a little bit of this, a little bit of that. Try again. Don't just go and level up everybody all at once. Do it a little bit at a time and see if that makes a difference. Because if you can get over that line with the minimal investment possible, it's going to give you more resources for a longer period of time. And particularly with core gear, remember, when I say if you get behind on core gear, where the problem lies is that this is stuff that you should never be farming on nodes, right? You want to avoid node farming. And if you're in a position where you're like, man, I'm 4 million galactic power and I need to go back to node farming Carbonis, like you are way behind where you should be, right? So you don't want to be putting gear on these characters, like just focus it on the characters you're going to be needing and otherwise bare minimum possible, right? You really need to avoid that node farming of any kind of core gear. And I say any kind of core gear because, again, we'll cover this in another, another kind of bottleneck video, right? But Kyrotechs are what we want to be farming on nodes. So we need to avoid that, Carbonti, stun gun farming, and instead rely on the other means of obtaining that gear, right? And then finally, the last thing, right? It's a trap, right? So this is the one trap that Capital Games set. And we're going to talk about this in terms of the new raid store, right? So the primary source of your core gear should be your daily challenges, right? This is where you're going to get a lot of these things, right? This is where you get your stun cuffs, these Mark 6 pieces, right? Come over here, right? You get stun guns and the eyeballs. Right over here, you're getting your Carbonis and the droid collars. Like this is, the challenges are kind of be like the primary way you get some of those core gear pieces, right? Particularly like the Carbonis and stuff. So the only other way I would offset those is with your guild tokens, right? And you don't get nearly as many guild tokens as you used to, which is perfectly fine. That's the kind of stuff that I would buy, right? Your stun cuffs, your Carbonis. Those are the pieces that if you use with your tokens there where you're not getting as much but you're still supplementing it, I think that's going to be the smartest thing because you are getting passive income for them, right? Through challenges, through all these other different kinds of rewards, you're going to be able to get, more of that stuff. And so by using tokens to buy it instead, you're going to be in a lot better shape. And I think that way you're still kind of increasing that, balance, but you're not going to be like spending what I would say, your Mark 1 raid tokens, which instead need to go to some of these other pieces. So if we scroll down to where you can spend Mark 1. So when they made this of you can go and spend it on whatever you need, players like myself had instantly gained an advantage. That over the years that I played the tank raid and the Sith raid, I got a ton of gear, right, that I never really would have equipped, right? And now, right, we're gonna find ourselves in a position, now maybe not somebody, I'd say, I'm in a different boat because of how long I was able to play and, hoard these rewards. But for newer players, where you're going to find yourself in this trap is that you won't have, 1,300 of these, right? You're going to have to buy these yourself. You're going to have to spend that time buying this stuff. And so you want to avoid spending this Mark 1 stuff on things like stun cuffs and Carbonis when you can. Now, obviously, early on, you may need to do that, right? But that you'll want to make sure that you're buying the gear like these pieces, right? The stuff that kind of creeps up on you, because this stuff doesn't occur nearly as naturally in the game. And so, again, this was the one thing that I was afraid of with the raid currency change is that players are going to get trapped, right? They're going to get caught out, and you're going to realize, like, oh my gosh, I need to buy a bunch of these things or these things, right? That things that players like myself probably take for granted because, again, the raid was on for so long where I was getting so many of these things that you didn't really need. You're like, begging it to drop you stun guns, right? And it's never dropping them. So that's the one trap I would say, right, that you've got to really be careful of with core gear. If you want to get out of that crunch as quickly as possible, make sure that you're relying on that passive income when you can. Supplement it with the guild tokens, but primarily with the Mark 1 raid. That's the stuff that you want to be buying these things with, right? That gear that's not occurring as naturally for you. If you can do that and find the balance that works for you, and sometimes you might get caught out, right? That's okay. You're going to find that balance of things that works for you. Obviously, make sure you get the characters you need with this Mark 1 raid currency, but as you progress, you'll kind of find that balance. And every once in a while, like what I've been doing is I'll just like randomly come in here and buy something. And I'll be like, hey, you know what? I need a couple of those. I'm going to spend on it, right? Or I need a couple of these things. I'm going to buy it, right? And just kind of keeping that stock going. See what you're missing out on. See what you may need and buy that. And if you do this, guys, I promise you, you're going to find that core gear crunch alleviate itself so much more quickly. And as soon as you can get done with that, you can start moving on to some of those other bottlenecks, trying to alleviate those other bottlenecks that exist in this game. So thank you so much for joining me in this video. Hopefully this helps you kind of understand the core gear and understand how you can sort of, manipulate the tools inside of the game to get you more of it and build up that stockpile. And yeah, guys, I'm going to do this for a lot of the other bottlenecks in the game. So make sure you stay tuned for that. Make sure that you guys are smashing that subscribe button, leaving likes, leaving comments. And again, to my channel members, thank you guys so much. You all are amazing. That's it, guys. May the force be with you. I'll see you on the next video. Cheers.